I love what you mentioned around resilience. It's something we talk about at Burgo a lot. And in fact, our unofficial mascot is the rhino. I've got one here right next to me. And the rhino has this really thick skin, right? So it can withstand life's challenges. And I think he is just a great picture of that. Life throws these torpedoes at you, and you just have to be able to withstand them and hopefully come out on the other end even stronger. And I think that's exactly what he did.
You're listening to the Real Returns podcast, where we learn how real investments can make a real impact. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they share stories and interview business leaders on how real estate and other forms of investment can create meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. And this is a special episode. We have a recap of our entire 6th season. I've got my co-host, Dan the Man Croce. Dan, it's hard to believe we've done 6 seasons of the podcast. So that brings us to concluding 3 years of podcasting.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Crazy. It's actually crazy to look back on, and it's fun to have these reflective moments and think about all the interesting people we've met. So yeah. But hey, I'm excited to do this one and think back on the last few months of getting to interview some interesting people. But thinking I had an interesting weekend. Actually, it was Memorial Day weekend. I was alone with my kids. My wife was in actually Washington, D.C., and I got to do some really fun things. We went to a Pittsburgh Pirates game, and we camped out in the backyard. And you know what? I realized what those fun things have in common, like going to a Pirates game and camping in the backyard.
Your kids weren't there?
No, they were there.
Oh, they were there?
I had them with me. I had them with me. But they're both things that are supposed to be really fun. But the whole time you're there, you're just like, can I just go inside and go to bed?
Did the Pirates lose?
They won, actually. They won.
Oh, look at that.
Somehow they won. But.
Yeah, well, I saw the Pirates this year, went into extra innings, and then they lost.
Okay.
So,
it
was a delayed letdown. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, we had a fun season, and 8 episodes per season is what we've been doing. So let's just kind of bang through them, talk about some of our takeaways. So episode 1, we had Ed Matthews, similar business to us, real estate operator, particularly focusing on sustainability, which I think is cool, very impact oriented. What were your thoughts? Any takeaways from that session?
Yeah, I think I appreciate people like Ed who just kind of, push the envelope on what's possible from an impact investing standpoint in our space, where sometimes you think your hands are tied. So Ed's doing solar panels, and he's, that's kind of above and beyond, for workforce housing. You're just trying to, sometimes doing what you can, but that's just showing like an extra effort and outside of the box thinking. Sometimes a little bit hard for us in our geographies. We don't get the most sun, things like that, but I was really inspired to see someone who's doing, gritty workforce housing, but with really forward-thinking, environmental-friendly investment strategy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, panels in particular require an upfront commitment of capital. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a real way to put your money where your mouth is if you want to have impact. And he's doing that. So I thought that was really interesting. Great. Episode 2, we jumped into mobile home park investing with Kevin Bupp. And, Kevin has his own podcast. He talks a lot about creating awareness around impact, around mobile home parks, around creating community. Like, what does it mean to actually have a community there at the mobile home park? Mm-hmm. I thought that was fascinating. What are some of the things you took away from that?
Yeah, it was an interesting kind of a different approach to how you can invest capital to improve, workforce housing. In our instance, I think you just kind of most naturally often go to the unit itself. But in his scenario where he doesn't actually own the unit, the family is in control of what that specific physical environment is like. But man, what an impact you can have by being common area focused. And so it really challenged my thinking to say, all right, well, how can we at our multifamily assets, have that common area focus, and that does more naturally result in building community in a space like that. And it gives, I loved his perspective on creating an ownership perspective for the people that live there. It's their community. It's not your community. Yeah, and good. So listening to them about what would make their community a better community and then deploying capital in response to that, I thought that was really challenging and brilliant.
I totally agree. In fact, I was thinking of that in terms of our business and multifamily, and how can you create that same community feel, that same accountability and sense of ownership? I think in mobile home parks, people have a sense of ownership of their home. And, I was thinking about, hey, how can you create that same community, that same ownership? in the multifamily space. And it definitely had me thinking about that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Episode 3, again, real estate as well. So we had a real estate heavy season, but another totally different asset class. So here we're talking about raw land investing. Mark Podolsky, I think, called himself the land geek, which I thought was pretty funny. And he was all about investing in land. So again, it's something I didn't have a ton of exposure to until talking to him. It's one of the things I love about this podcast. We get to interview people doing all kinds of different things, generating impact in different ways. What were some of the things that you took out of that?
Yeah, so his focus is really on the financial side of the equation with what it can do for investors. And I thought that was like accurate and inspiring. I do think that people can use raw land to generate a passive income stream to then improve the rest of their lives. But I was actually kind of compelled by the strategy itself. Sometimes we talk about entrepreneurship as taking the raw materials of the world around you and rearranging them in a way that contributes to more flourishing. So just thinking, intentionally about actually owning raw land and thinking about how to make raw land more productive, I think is just a net good thing. So I definitely learned a lot. Like you had not thought a lot about that prior to. Still want to learn more and, think about it from an investment strategy standpoint. But I was just inspired to think about the actual physical raw land that's around us and how to make the most of that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, that is literally like the raw material of the earth. And it's hard to think about, again, they're not making any more of it. In our space, multifamily, you can go up, but when it comes to dirt, there's just only so much of it. Right.
Yep.
So, it's got inherent value, and thinking of, the impact of that generationally, even, I think is something worth thinking about.
For sure. One more thought there. Just I've been reading some perspectives from Warren Buffett recently, and he compares gold to raw land investing. And he's a big land guy because he thinks like, look, this is stuff that has productive capacity. He doesn't like gold because it just sits there. Like, what's it ever going to do for you? You take it out of the ground and then look at it.
Right.
But, he has a big part of his investment philosophy is just about utility. And so I'm encouraged to kind of go deeper on raw land, but thought that Mark was a very interesting land geek. So.
That's so cool because I love the sort of analogy, in this case, contrasting to gold. But one of the things I've actually always done is thought of our product as like gold with cash flow. I think for folks who are maybe new getting into real estate investing, there's actually a lot of similarity. Like the reason that people invest in gold is because it's a commodity that has inherent value. And I think real estate is the same way, but it generates cash flow.
Yeah.
That is something that gold does not,
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, I don't disagree with Warren Buffett. I'd be a fool to, obviously, but I think there may be more similarities than
that's a good point
there.
Yep.
Cool. So then we got into talking a little bit about affordable housing and curb buyers, kind of the space that they're in, really taking vacant homes that are currently not serving a purpose and turning them into, housing that is generating income. I think what New Western is doing there is really interesting, really helping, some people call it flipping homes, but really helping people get exposure to that kind of a investment product. What did you think?
Yeah, I appreciate their approach, which is to build this marketplace where people who have capital, who want to invest into rehabs, can find the homes to do that in their own neighborhoods. At its most basic level, I mean, I love that. That is like, it's entrepreneurial, it's value, it's clear value add, but it's also just like an obvious solution to part of our affordable housing crisis in the country. Like, we do have a shortage of units, but part of the solution is just take the units that are already there, that are vacant and that need some TLC, and get them back online. And so I appreciate that as just a societal solution to a really big problem. I think people are always talking about development and new builds and all that stuff, but the reality is we've got a lot of capacity in our housing stock already.
Yeah.
We just need to, do the dirty work of bringing it back online. So I love what they're doing in terms of its, yes, of course, it's benefit to investors, but also benefit to the affordable housing stock in the country.
Yeah. And I don't know the exact number for the supply, but I think from a demand perspective, there's something like 3 million affordable housing units needed nationwide. And I've got to think that vacant homes, there's probably also about 3 million, right? Like it's
Yeah.
probably a big number.
Yep.
So if you could just one-to-one
Yeah.
solve that issue.
Yeah. I mean, certain neighborhoods, you drive down the streets and you're like, there's a lot of vacant homes in these neighborhoods. And I think a solution there is to one by one go in and just actually rehab them. And it makes economic sense 9 times out of 10. So
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. And then speaking of, we were talking about national trends, but just looking at the global scale, I thought it was really interesting. Our next guest, Gavin Gallagher, was in Dublin, Ireland. And I always love having an international guest when we can, just to get a little bit of a global perspective. It's so fun to hear somebody that's been through, in his case, 30 years of real estate investing in Ireland, been through cycles. They had a really tough cycle that totally wiped him out. And he sort of came back out of that and talked about his journey to have impact, sort of having come out of that. So I loved his story. I love the fact that he's, in a different country doing some similar stuff to what we're doing. So what were your thoughts on that episode?
Yeah, that was honestly, in the history of our podcast, that was one of the more impactful ones to me. Just Gavin had a humility and a transparency about him that I think just goes a long way to quality dialogue. And yeah, I mean, he lost it all. He made it big and he lost it. And he just told his story transparently and talked about the heartache that caused on a personal level and just really what it was like walking through that valley. So I just have a ton of respect for the transparency, but also the grit that, he said, all right, I've fallen down. He looked around and he said, what do I have? I have a network and I have some skills and I can get there again if I claw and scratch my way there. So I just had a ton of respect for him and the story. Yeah. I think the story was inspirational. And yeah, I enjoy thinking about, investing internationally and how he thinks about real estate and how capital markets move in a different context. So super fascinating conversation, but I certainly learned a lot from that one, just on a personal level from his openness.
Yeah. I love what you mentioned around resilience. It's something we talk about at Burgo a lot. And in fact, our unofficial mascot is the rhino. I've got one here right next to me. And the rhino has this really thick skin, right? So it can withstand life's challenges. And I think he is just a great picture of that. Life throws these torpedoes at you and you just have to be able to withstand them and hopefully come out on the other end even stronger. And I think that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, for sure.
So then we had Alpesh Parmar. He has done tons of stuff in the investing space, but the one thing that really caught my attention and caught my heart was he actually wrote a children's book around personal finance and investing. And I'm currently writing a children's book with my oldest daughter. And I was just mentioning this to you, using the same consultant publisher that he used for his. And sure, he's done all kinds of cool stuff, mobile home park investing, senior housing facilities. But not only does he do the thing, he also wants to teach the younger generation about personal finance. And honestly, Dan, I've learned a ton about personal finance from you. So I know that that's a topic that you're passionate about, you've taught me about, and that I'm now teaching my kids about. Yeah. So I thought it was cool to have somebody like that on our show.
Totally agree. And honestly, what I think he did was pretty unique from a product standpoint. I bought the book because I geek out over the stuff that he does and had my kids read it. And now all of a sudden, it did a good job of taking some complex topics that he doesn't just talk about, like a budget. That's kind of like usually what kids think about when they think, or what parents try and teach kids, right? Personal finance. But he delved into asset classes. Like, what are the role of various asset classes when you're trying to invest? And so that just kind of leveled up the kind of dialogue I could have with my kids. And I never thought about, really trying to talk them through that, but to put that in a framework where kids can start to understand like the investment landscape around them, but in their own terms, I thought that was brilliant and really enjoyed the conversation, thought his vision was a good one. And I'm rooting for it, that message to continue to take off.
Yeah. And you and I often compare notes on, kind of raising our kids. And one note that I got from you and that I think is sort of aligned with his thinking is actually teaching our kids about investing at a young age. So you and I both use this Greenlight app and you've been using it to teach kids about spending and saving. And I now have my kids investing in stocks through the app. And that's been great advice from you, just teaching them. I mean, you mentioned asset classes, but like, when my girls think, oh, I own a little piece of Amazon or, oh, I own a little piece of NVIDIA. It's just kind of a fun thing to,
it's totally,
at that age, have kids understand what does it mean to have ownership.
Yep. Yeah, it's a really fun thing. Highly recommend it to any parents out there. Just it can be $2, but just getting them in that mindset of investing in ownership.
Yeah, love it. So our next guest was Arun Gupta, who is a Virgo investor. And, I'm obviously biased because we know him personally, but he's also just brilliant, incredibly successful, has done some amazing things in the venture capital space and, community building. And would love to hear just kind of what were some of the things that you actually took out of his session.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm also biased. I think Arun's one of the more impressive people that I know, but I'm not in the least surprised to see him thriving in a different context now. He wrote this book about connecting people and purpose and profit and trying to get the government and nonprofit and for-profit sectors all to collaborate on solving big problems in society. Mm-hmm. And I'm betting on it to actually make a dent in, some of the things they're trying to do. His work at Noble Reach, I think really smart to tackle the human capital problem and say, all right, what is America's greatest resources? It's human capital. And so how can we unleash that talent to tackle big problems and not just have this sort of dichotomy of either I make money or I do good for society, which is really just so core to the things we like to talk about on this podcast. So I was really inspired by the work that he's doing, and I am betting on them to succeed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, he's just brilliant, but also he has empathy and he speaks with humility. Mm-hmm. And that's just one of the things that I love about him. I think there's a lot of smart people out there that, can create change, and no offense or disrespect to any of them, but he doesn't just have a high IQ, he has a high EQ. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's helping him to be a change agent.
For sure.
Last but not least, we had Alicia Hill with FCP. She's doing their impact investing. Really, again, speaking of brilliant, super smart, highly educated, and highly capable person in our space, kind of doing it day in and day out. What were some of the things that you got out of that session?
Yeah, so I had not spoken to Alicia prior to the podcast recording, and I think you guys had connected prior, but I was blown away. I didn't, really understand her pedigree or what she was working on, but I love it when people come into the real estate space with a passion for the affordable housing, but with a completely different background. I think they bring a really unique perspective and a healthy perspective. But I think her passion was contagious, and her vision for how to do this kind of investing well, I thought was really inspiring. It seems like a super high commitment to excellence and thoughtfulness about how we go about things, thoughtful engagement of stakeholders, thoughtful investment structures, just across the board. I thought, this is a person who's getting it right. And I think we want and need more of that in our industry. So I know that's a vague statement, but I think she's one of the people who is thinking holistically about all the stakeholders and what are we trying to achieve, not just from an ROI standpoint, but from a societal impact standpoint. And how can we do that with excellence? I mean, that's super inspiring.
Yeah. And not only is she doing it day in and day out, but she's really leading the way. So, with her involvement in the Emerging Leaders Program through the National Multifamily Housing Council, NMHC, I know you were at the conference this year. She's been leading the way with emerging leaders. What I love is that she's continuing the dialogue. She's getting people thinking about these things. She's speaking about them, and having somebody that's as passionate as she is about moving the needle just gives me so much hope for the future of our industry. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, we've got amazing people who are just going to be the next people carrying the torch that care and that are going to have a huge impact. And as I think about the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years of multifamily investing, of investing in general, I just get super excited and optimistic about what that next generation of leaders is going to do.
Yeah, I think for people like us who are in the trenches, it can be really energizing to pick our heads up and realize, oh, there are other people who really, really care about this in a meaningful way, and they're doing big stuff, and they're going to succeed and surpass anything that we could have hoped to do. So I think, yeah, just encouraging, and for me, it develops a sense of community that I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, thank you to all of our guests, the 8 guests that we had this past season. We wouldn't be here without each and every one of you. Thank you to our listeners. Listener base keeps growing. Please do subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're catching us. We'd love to continue the dialogue next season. We've got an exciting 7th season that we're already planning and starting to record on. And I think it's going to be our best season yet. Please do continue to join us. Thanks for joining the Real Returns podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Real Returns podcast. We hope that you learned something new about how you can invest to make a lasting impact on those around you. Please be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and share about us on social media. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be continuing the conversation around impactful real estate investing.